Ordinary circumstances, extraordinary people of God, friends, and those two things in combination can produce a turn of events that just change the course of history. Today we're going to see one such event, looking at the book of Esther. Thanks for joining the Amazing Grace Bible Study today. Well, friends, it is about 470, 80-ish years before Jesus shows up. And there is this king, Ahasuerus. Some call him Xerxes the first. And he has this queen, and her name is Vashti. And the king has a party. He has a banquet. He has all of these high leaders within his form of government to come in. What area of the world is this? At the time it was called Persia. This would be modern day Iran. This is in the city of Shushan at the time. And the king has this party, and he has the queen called in. But she refuses to come and join the king at his party, at his banquet. And so she's removed of her benefits of being the queen. She's removed of her title and taken completely out of that. Really, in context, this woman could have easily been killed. So she must have been very bitter in her heart about something. And, you know, sometimes circumstances of life can cause us to become bitter and hard-hearted and angry. And those responses that come out of us are not always the best. I wonder how many times that Queen Vashti had regretted her decision to not come in before the king. Maybe it was pride that had gotten to her head, and she thought, well, I don't have to go. I don't feel like going. I'm just not going. Whatever the case, Queen Vashti is no longer queen. That is the context of what we're going to be reading as we begin in chapter 2 and verse 4 of the book of Esther. I hope that giving you a little bit of that background helps you understand. But just one other piece of information before we begin to read. This is about 100 years after the Babylonians conquer Jerusalem, and some of the Jews are taken into exile again. So they've been removed out of Jerusalem. They've been taken over into Persia and to Shushan, this area of where this is taking place. But they've been taken into captivity, and they become part of the people there. The ones that were taken, they become part of the community there in Persia. And so that's what we're getting ready to read about as well. And again, this is about 100 years after that defeat has happened. So here in Esther chapter 2 verse 4, I want to let you know we're going to be doing a lot of reading today. And the reason for that is so that we can really take in all the understanding of the culture at this time and see some of the differences. Definitely lots of differences in the culture today versus at this time. And also to see ordinary circumstances and ordinary events producing some extraordinary turn of events in time. Okay? Esther 2 verse 4, it says, "And let the maiden which pleaseth the king be queen instead of Vashti." And the king and the thing pleased the king, and he did so. Well, what has happened here is that because Vashti has been removed from being the queen, The advisors to the king say, well, bring in some fair young maidens, some young virgins, bring those in, and then you can, pick who you want after a course of time, after some cultural things that were done, that they would pick that the king would pick who he wanted to be his queen. So he had these women brought in. That way he'd have a queen. So, verse 5, now in Shushan, the palace, there was a certain Jew whose name was Mordecai, the son of Jair, the son of Shimei, the son of Kish, of Benjamin. So now we're given the lineage of Mordecai, this man that comes in. And Mordecai is a descendant of the tribe of Benjamin. That's why it notices, Scripture says that a Benjamite. And remember, there were 12 tribes of Israel. They were the descendants, the sons of Jacob, who is Abraham's grandson. So the 12 tribes of Israel, the great-grandchildren of Abraham. Verse 6, who had been carried away from Jerusalem with the captivity, which had been carried away with Jeconiah, king of Judah, whom Nebuchadnezzar, the king of Babylon, had carried away. Now, given the context there of these people that had been carried away into Babylon. Verse 7, and he brought up Hadassah, that is Esther, his uncle's daughter, for she had neither father nor mother, and the maid was fair and beautiful. So she had a Persian name, but also her Jewish name, which is Esther. And it says she was fair and beautiful, and she had no mother nor father. She had been orphaned. And it says, whom Mordecai, when her father and mother were dead, took for his own daughter. So the cousin takes Esther in to raise as his own daughter. Verse 8, so it came to pass when the king's commandment and his decree was heard, and when many maidens were gathered together unto Shushan, the palace, to the custody of Haggai, that Esther was brought also into the king's house to the custody of Haggai, keeper of the women. And the maiden pleased him, and she obtained kindness of him, and he speedily gave her things for purification, with such things as belonged to her, and 7 maidens, which were meet to be given her out of the king's house. And he preferred her and her maids unto the best place of the house of the women. So Esther is Mordecai's adopted daughter, basically. He brings her in when he hears that the king is looking for a new queen. And he knows that his cousin, that basically his daughter, his adopted daughter, is a beautiful and just a wonderful person. And he thinks, well, she's got as good a chance as anybody. He brings her in. The king immediately puts her in the best place in the house. So it's almost really that the king has immediately chosen her, even though he hasn't. There's a period of time that must take place in this time of purifications. This was culture for the Jewish people to do, but also cultural for the time that the king would do this and set aside a woman to choose to be his wife, and things. There would be this process of things that would happen for her before he would basically marry her, take her as his wife, and take her. And for this in particular, take this man, this is a king, to take her as his queen. So he immediately takes a liking to Esther, and he puts her in the best place in the house where all these women are being kept and basically taught some things. They're being made, to be very beautiful. They use ointments and spices on the women. They probably go through definitely some teaching courses on how to be a queen, right? And what would be basically what we would say politically correct or not. And so it says the Haggai, that Esther was brought also into the king's house to the custody of Haggai, keeper of the women. And the maiden, verse 9, pleased him, and she obtained kindness of him, and he speedily gave her all the things for purification. Notice that the king immediately speedily gave Esther all the things for purification to go ahead and get it started. This 12 months that they are going to be doing this. In verse 10 it says, Esther had not showed her people nor her kindred, for Mordecai had charged her that she should not show. So what is that? This mean is that she's not telling, she's not going and making it public that she's a Jew. Okay? And Mordecai walked every day before the court of the women's house to know how Esther did and what should become of her. Now when every maid's turn was come in to go to King Ahasuerus, after that she had been 12 months, according to the manner of the women, for so were the days of their purification accomplished, to wit, 6 months with oil of myrrh, and 6 months with sweet odors, and with other things for the purifying of the women. Then thus came every maiden unto the king. Whatsoever she desired was given to her, given to go with her out of the house of the women unto the king's house. In the evening she went, and on the morrow she returned into the second house of the women, to the custody of Shashgaz, the king's chamberlain, which kept the concubines. She came in unto the king no more, except the king delighted in her, and that she were called by name. So once she would come in and have that one night with the king, that she would come no more unless she was called by name. Verse 15, now when the turn of Esther, the daughter of Abihail, the uncle of Mordecai, who had taken her for his daughter, was come to go in unto the king, she required nothing but what Haggai, the king's chamberlain, the keeper of the women, appointed, and Esther obtained favor in the sight of all them that looked upon her. So Esther had already obtained favor among all of these people. And she was, she looked very beautiful. And Esther inquired basically of Haggai, of what should I go in with? She knows that Haggai knows the king better than she does. She's only been there for a year. And so she's taking advice of the authority that has been put before her. She's not a rebellious person. And kind of notice these things about her. This is part of what makes her extraordinary. Okay, extraordinary. So Esther was taken, verse 16, unto King Ahasuerus into his house royal in the 10th month, which is the month Tebeth, in the 7th year of his reign. And the king loved Esther above all the women, and she obtained grace and favor in his sight more than all the virgins, so that he set the royal crown upon her head and made her queen instead of Vashti. Then the king made a great feast unto all his princes and his servants, even Esther's feast. And he made a release to the provinces and gave gifts according to the state of the king. And when the virgins were gathered together the second time, then Mordecai sat in the king's gate. Esther had not showed her kindred nor her people, as Mordecai had charged her. For Esther did the commandment of Mordecai, like as when she was brought up with him. Notice that as he was raising her, she would do as he said. And notice what scripture says there at the end of verse 20. For Esther did the commandment of Mordecai, like as when she was brought up with him. She was good. She was obedient. And that's something to be said, because I think what people can omit in their consideration of Esther is that she had some significant life events that could have caused her to be bitter, hard-hearted, and rebellious. Both of her parents died. She had to be raised by someone else. It doesn't end there. But as a beautiful young woman, she's brought in to be considered for queen. Well, you might say, well, of course, anybody would want that for that time. And maybe she did, maybe she didn't. Scripture says that she did, because she did what Mordecai had told her to do. She was obedient to her authority. She didn't have a rebellious spirit. And even though some major life events came to her at a young age, it didn't cause her to become hateful and bitter. People liked her, and she was also beautiful. And so what we get to see in Esther is someone who could have let beauty go to her head, but she didn't. and could have let her hard circumstances change her in a negative way, but she didn't. I think that's something to note about her, right? Let's read on. Verse 21. In those days, while Mordecai sat in the king's gate, two of the king's chamberlains, Bigthan and Teresh, of those which kept the door, were wroth, and sought to lay hand on the king Ahasuerus. And the thing was known to Mordecai, who told it unto Esther the queen. And Esther certified the king, therefore, in Mordecai's name. And when accusation was made of the matter, it was found out, therefore, that they were both hanged on a tree. And it was written in the book of the Chronicles before the king. So what has happened? There was two men that was keepers of the door. They were very close to the king, basically. Mordecai found out that they were very angry at King Ahasuerus and wanted to kill him. They wanted to do away with him. Well, what ends up happening? Well, because it was Mordecai knew this, he told Esther the queen. Esther went and put in an inquisition so that it could be checked into, and put Mordecai's name on this inquisition, and it was found out to be true, and so the two men were hanged. Okay? Chapter 3, verse 1. After these things did King Ahasuerus promote Haman, the son of Hammedatha, the Agagite, and advanced him and set his seat above all the princes that were with him. And all the king's servants that were in the king's gate bowed and reverenced Haman, for the king had so commanded concerning him. But Mordecai bowed not, nor did him reverence. So right after this, the king advances Haman, and gives Haman more rule, more control. After this had happened, where his life was to be taken. Well, Haman was someone that was trusted by the king. Let's read on. And all the king's servants, verse 2, that were in the king's gate bowed and reverenced Haman, for the king had so commanded concerning him. But Mordecai bowed not, nor did him reverence. Then the king's servants, which were in the king's gates, said unto Mordecai, Why transgresseth thou the king's commandment? Now it came to pass, when they spake daily unto him, and he hearkened not unto them, that they told Haman, to see whether Mordecai's matters would stand. For he had told them he was a Jew. Okay, so the Jewish people worshiped their God, and they were not to bow down before other men, women, false gods, right? It says, and when Haman saw that Mordecai bowed not, nor did him reverence, then was Haman full of wrath. Verse 6 now, and he thought scorn to lay hands on Mordecai alone, for they had showed him the people of Mordecai. Wherefore Haman sought to destroy all the Jews that were throughout the whole kingdom of Ahasuerus, even the people of Mordecai. So now the king realizes it's not just Mordecai, it's all the Jews. They're not bowing down to me, right? And so he wants to kill them all. In the first month, now verse 7, in the first month, that is the month Nisan, in the 12th year of King Ahasuerus, they cast pur, that is the lot, before Haman from day to day, and from month to month, to the 12th month, that is the month Adar. And Haman said unto King Ahasuerus, There is a certain people scattered abroad and dispersed among the people in all the provinces of thy kingdom, and their laws are diverse from all people. Neither keep they the king's laws. Therefore it is not the king's profit to suffer them. If it please the king, let it be written, that they may be destroyed. And I will pay 10,000 talents of silver to the hands of those that have the charge of the business, to bring it unto the king's treasuries. And the king took his ring from his hand, and gave it unto Haman, the son of Hammedatha, the Agagite, the Jews' enemy. Now we get a further context that Haman was of a descent of people who were the enemies of the Jews, the Agagites. Notice that Scripture is giving us more of an understanding of what's taking place here. But now, Haman went to the king and told the king, hey, you've got people within your government in your rule that are not following your laws. All right, because Haman wanted to be bowed down to. And he says, if it's please you, I'll go and destroy them all, because it doesn't do you good for people to be openly rebellious. That's what he's saying. And I will pay 10,000 talents. He'll put a bunch of money up to go and have this done by, he himself will provide the funds to go and have the Jews killed. And so the king gives him his ring, which means you take my ring, you make all the decrees that you need to have this done. And he agreed. Again, the king didn't know Esther was a Jew. Esther didn't tell anybody, but she is the queen. Okay. Now verse 11 in chapter 3. And the king said unto Haman, the silver is given to thee, the people also to do with them as it seemeth good to thee. Then there were the king's scribes called on the 13th day of the first month, and there was written according to all that Haman had commanded unto the king's lieutenants and to the governors that were over every province, and to the rulers of every people of every province according to the writing thereof, and to every people after their language. In the name of King Ahasuerus was it written and sealed with the king's ring. And the letters were sent by post into all the king's provinces to destroy, to kill, and to cause to perish all Jews, both young and old, little children and women, in one day, even upon the 13th day of the 12th month, which is the month Adar, and to take the spoil of them for a prey. They were all going to be killed on the same day, and it was given a particular day that they would be killed. The copy of the writing for a commandment to be given in every province was published unto all the people, and they should be ready against that day. Now verse 15 of chapter 3. The post went out, being hastened by the king's commandment, and the decree was given in Shushan the palace, and the king had Haman sat down to drink, but the city Shushan was perplexed. So now all the people are finding out. This is what's going to happen on such and such day. All the Jews, everybody that you know that's Jewish descent, they're all going to be killed. They might be your friends. They might be your business partners. They might be your best customers. But guess what? Every Jew is going to be killed on such and such day. And it says all the people of Shushan were like, huh? Right? Because they're living and dwelling among these peaceable people, right? They have their own religion, but they're peaceable people. They're not causing problems. And you're going to kill them all? Every one of them? The babies too? What could possibly have happened? I want to remind us, friends, that there has never been a group of people ever to be persecuted as much as the people of God, the Jewish people, the Hebrew people, the Jews, among any else. And so all the people of the city of Shushan, though, were perplexed by this. Now, start in verse 1 of chapter 4. It says, when Mordecai perceived all that was done, Mordecai rent his clothes and put on sackcloth with ashes and went out into the midst of the city and cried with a loud and a bitter cry, and came even before the king's gate, for none might enter into the king's gate clothed with sackcloth. And in every province, whithersoever the king's commandment and his decree came, there was a great mourning among the Jews, and fasting and weeping and wailing, and many lay in sackcloth and ashes. So Esther's maids and her chamberlains came and told it her. Then was the queen exceedingly grieved, and she sent raiment to clothe Mordecai and to take away his sackcloth from him, but he received it not. Esther is very grieved, friends. This is all of her people. And now there's already a decree to kill them all. And she's exceedingly grieved. Verse 5. I want to pause there for a minute too and also say, Esther was someone with a tender heart. She really loved people. She really cared about people because people really liked her. You notice that the scripture recorded that all the women looked upon her. They were fond of her. And that says a lot. She'd been living with them for a year, and she was highly favored, even among the women that she was with. So I think that it's something to take note of, how much she must have been in pain when it says that she was exceedingly grieved. To be someone who loves people so much, and to consider that all the people that you grew up with and all of their family and all of them, all the Jews were to be killed. That's what this decree was, and it had been sent out already, that it was going to happen on this one particular day. Can you imagine? So she sends some clothes to Mordecai so that he's not in his sackcloth and ashes, because you can't come closer. He couldn't come close to her wearing those clothes. But he refused them, it says. And he received it not, is what it says there in the end of verse 4. Now let's read on, verse 5. Then called Esther for Hathach, one of the king's chamberlains, whom he had appointed to attend upon her, and gave him a commandment to Mordecai to know what it was and why it was. So Hathach went forth to Mordecai unto the street of the city, which was before the king's gate. And Mordecai told him of all that had happened unto him, and of the sum of the money that Haman had promised to pay to the king's treasuries for the Jews to destroy them. Also he gave him the copy of the writing of the decree that was given at Shushan to destroy them, to show it unto Esther, and to declare it unto her, and to charge her that she should go in unto the king to make supplication unto him, and to make request before him for her people. And Hathach came and told Esther the words of Mordecai. Again Esther spake unto Hathach, and gave him commandment unto Mordecai. All the king's servants and the people of the king's provinces do know that whosoever, whether man or woman, shall come unto the king into the inner court, who is not called, there is one law of his to put him to death, except such to whom the king shall hold out the golden scepter, that he may live. But I have not been called to come in unto the king these 30 days. So Mordecai sends and tells Esther, you have got to go in before the king to tell him to save your people. But she says, I've not been called in. And if I go in without being called, I'll be killed unless he holds out his golden rod, his golden scepter. So this is Mordecai's reply. Verse 13. Then Mordecai commanded to answer Esther, think not with thyself that thou shalt escape in the king's house more than all the Jews. Mordecai's replying and saying, look, do you think that they're not going to come after you eventually? Because they're going to kill all the Jews. And they'll kill you too. Verse 14. For if thou altogether holdest thy peace at this time, then shall their enlargement and deliverance arise to the Jews from another place. But thou and thy father's house shall be destroyed. And who knoweth whether thou art come to the kingdom for such a time as this? Have you heard that before? That you are here for such a time as this? This is what was told to Esther by Mordecai. Verse 15, then Esther bade them return Mordecai this answer, go gather all the Jews that are present in Shushan, and fast for me, and neither eat nor drink 3 days, night or day. I also and my maidens will fast likewise, and so will I go unto the king, which is not according to the law. And if I perish, I perish. So Mordecai went his way, and did according to all that Esther had commanded him. Esther requests that the Jews would pray and fast for her. You notice that the name of God and the name of the Lord is not mentioned here. We don't see any context throughout the entire book of Esther of even the prayer that Esther prayed and cried out to God, or that Mordecai prayed and cried out to God. It's unique to have that and for it to not be recorded. We also don't know exactly who wrote the book of Esther, although most scholars believe it was Mordecai along with Esther. But really, Mordecai, look over it just briefly, hold your spot there where we were in chapter 5, or the end of chapter 4 there, and get over to chapter 9 real quick. Verse 20, it says, and Mordecai wrote these things and sent letters unto all the Jews that were in all the provinces of the king Ahasuerus, both nigh and far. Then look at verse 29. Then Esther the queen, the daughter of Abihail, and Mordecai the Jew, wrote with all authority to confirm this second letter of Purim. So many scholars believe it was likely Mordecai that recorded this later, but it also could have been that that whoever the author actually, what we know, God inspired it, but we know that who God used to actually write it, it's not given to us. Just like in the New Testament, the book of Hebrews, we're not given that author either. We're seeing, which we have discussed in previous teachings, but we're seeing here that it was likely Mordecai and Esther as well who wrote it, but maybe God used Nehemiah to take all of these things, because he would have been very familiar with Persia and this area, and it would have fallen in within the timeline in which the book of Esther was written, and it could have possibly been Nehemiah who ended up writing it. We don't know, but we know that this story is recorded. And these are ordinary circumstances. This is why we're taking the time to read. This is the culture of the time. We're reading a history story about what took place with a king and his queen, and removing her of that privilege and going out to find a new queen. These are ordinary circumstances for the time. So Mordecai has told her, don't you realize that you're here for such a time as this? And then Esther replies back to Mordecai. She has sent this reply back to fast and pray, have all the people of Shushan, all the Jews of Shushan, to fast and pray for me for 3 days. Okay? And so Mordecai went his way and did according to all that Esther had commanded. Yeah, now starting to read here in chapter 5, verse 1. Now it came to pass on the 3rd day that Esther put on her royal apparel and stood in the inner court of the king's house. Now she's gone in and she's taken her life in and put it in a very high place of vulnerability, because she knows that she could be killed. If he doesn't put out the golden scepter, she is to be taken and killed. And because you can't come into the courts unless you're called. So, this is what she's done. She's put on a royal apparel and stood in the inner court of the king's house, over against the king's house, and the king sat upon his royal throne in the royal house over against the gate of the house. And it was so, when the king saw Esther the queen standing in the court, that she obtained favor in his sight. And the king held out to Esther the golden scepter that was in his hand. So Esther drew near and touched the top of the scepter. Then said the king unto her, What wilt thou, Queen Esther, and what is thy request? It shall be given thee to the half of the kingdom. Friends, I don't know that we really can take in what this really is communicating, but she had found such favor with the king that when she goes to do something that before him, that she didn't know the reasons why she hadn't been called in 30 days. What is he dealing with? Could he be angry? Could he be in a bad place? Could he be mentally ill and dealing with doctors and physicians at the time? And she doesn't know the reason. Could he be in the middle of a very important meeting? I know what he did with Vashti. All these things considered. And when she does go in before him, she knows she could die. But the king finds such favor with her that he says, I will even give you up to the half of my kingdom. What is it that you came in here for? What is it that's so important that you risked your life for? Well, friends, the story ends up going like this. That very night, the king, he couldn't sleep. And he sends for some of those documents to be brought in. Some of the things that have been going on. And it was God why he couldn't sleep, friends. And what is brought into him is these papers, and some of them include that Mordecai had been the one who had basically saved his life. because he reported these two men that wanted to kill the king, who were close to the king. But the king finds out it's Mordecai. He didn't even know. And so he brings in Haman before him, the very next day. And he asks Haman, what should we do to honor someone who has found great pleasure with the king? How should we honor him? Well, Haman thinks it's him that is being spoken of. So Haman says, oh, deck him out with the king's garments and the king's crown, and put him on the king's horse, and bring him through the city and parade him around so everybody can see what a man of honor that he is. And so then the king tells Haman, go do this unto Mordecai. And Haman immediately goes to do this. And remember, he absolutely despises Mordecai. And we see that in the reading further in the text, that he gets to a point where he wants to take his life in a moment, but he withholds himself. And he absolutely hates Mordecai, because Mordecai is bowing to his God, the one true God, and he's not bowing down to Haman. And it just eats Haman up. But now Haman is having to go to get this man that he despises among anyone else in the whole kingdom is Mordecai. And now he's got to take him and parade him around. And Haman has to do this. Can you imagine the time invested? He has to go get the garments. He has to be a part of this. He's the one. And can you imagine how much that just ate him alive? And Esther asked the King Ahasuerus to have a banquet. And she says, and have Haman come to the banquet. Well, Haman thinks, oh, good news for me. Esther wants to have, Esther the queen and the king, they want to have a meal with just me. And so it's brought in, and they have their banquet after Haman has taken Mordecai all around. And he goes in, and Esther is asked of the king again, what is it that you want to the half of my kingdom? And Esther replies that her people have been persecuted. They are to be killed and to destroy all of her people, and how it grieved her of how they were being treated, wrongly treated. And he says, well, who has done this? And there he is. He's at the banquet with them. It's Haman. And the king is angry. And he gets up and he takes off away from the banquet. He's full of wrath. Haman goes in. Esther ends up in her own room. And Haman goes in. And he's laying across her bed, just weeping and begging for his life. And the king comes in and says, are you going to force my life too? You know, you've come into a room, that's not allowed. And now you're laying on a bed, that's not okay. Right? And the king finds out at that moment that Haman had built the night before, because he thought everything was great. As far as he was concerned, he was getting ready to have a banquet meal with the king and the queen himself. And he had built gallows to have Mordecai hanged. You see. And so the king, when he finds this out, in that moment, when all this has taken place, with Haman on the bed of Esther, and he says, hang Haman on those gallows that he had built. And Haman is hanged. And the Jews were delivered. They were spared. And they were blessed because of this, because now it's made known that they are of the same lineage and the same family of Esther, the queen. They're treated highly Mordecai is given position and power in the kingdom of King Ahasuerus, and even greater than what Haman had ever had. So he's very wealthy and very lifted up. How amazing, friends. Do you see the understanding of what we can get, through this reading? And I encourage you to go and read more. It's not too many chapters, but it's kind of a short book of the Bible. Is that ordinary circumstances with extraordinary people of God can turn the course of time with events that matter to God. Events that change everything. And I want you to consider that as we are at the end of the age of the Gentiles, God has never stopped caring about his people, nor will he. And he will use ordinary circumstances with extraordinary people to turn everything around, to bless his people. And he's done it time and time again. And concerning the nation of Israel, he says, I will bless them that bless thee, and I will curse them that curseth thee. That is the word of Almighty God. Friends, so if we continue to stand up with the nation of Israel and with God's chosen people who are the heirs of the kingdom, who are Christians, that we continue to bless those people, God will bless. He will bless us. And I want you to think that now in the age of the Gentiles in which we are in, and we're at the end of the age, that God still has great plans that he wants to have accomplished before Christ returns. He's still going to use ordinary circumstances with some extraordinary people. People surrendered. That's who these extraordinary people are. That's who we see from cover to cover in the book, friends. When God uses people in such a way as what we saw Esther be used, people surrendered with a life surrendered. Let that be our heart. That where God can take your ordinary circumstance and turn it into something extraordinary. Well, thank you all for joining the Amazing Grace Bible study today. Lord willing, we'll be back on Monday with a new teaching, as we typically drop in our teachings every Monday through Thursday. We also have in-person meetings in Southern Indiana. We'd love to have, those are for women. We have women's meetings, women's groups. I would love to have any of you all who are in the area to reach out to us. You can find us on Facebook at the Amazing Grace Bible Study. God bless you all.